Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhnio. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of September the 30th. So join, watch this video, like, share, subscribe, and leave your comments below. Let's begin. Let's start the review with what's happening regarding in terms of strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation, not only on the territory of the Russian Federation, but also on the occupied territories. Today, there will be less analysis of the front because, to be honest, there are a lot of events happening at the front, but there is almost no enemy advancement. Well, I mean, there are certain negative trends, some things remain stable, and there are positive developments as well. I'm not going to, once again, for the 100th time, build up victories about the Dobropilia direction and about what Syrskyi talked about yesterday, how many kilometers have been liberated there now. Let's talk exclusively about strikes deep inside the territory of the Russian Federation, because right now, this aspect of the war is gradually gaining momentum and is becoming the #1 factor in determining who is winning the war or how the fighting should develop further. So let's get to it. Because Ukrainian forces are striking both with drones and, most importantly, with missiles. Right now you can see a photo. This is a photo that was taken in Bryansk region, in Russia's Bryansk region. This is the Russian Bryansk city of Karachay. There, the Karachay electro-detailed plant was hit, which is an important component of their military-industrial production, let's say one of the links in the chain of such production. And in fact, regarding this particular strike, there was an announcement, a statement from the General Staff that it was carried out specifically by missile forces and artillery. I have repeatedly emphasized that when the General Staff's report mentions that missile forces and artillery were at work, you can be sure that it was Ukrainian missiles in action, because the missile forces are precisely able to reach that far. For example, HIMARS could be in use, or other multiple launch rocket systems. It could be, say, the Ukrainian Verba MLRS or something else, and so on. Or it could be Ukrainian missiles at work. In fact, in this case, it really was missiles, and there was confirmation from the naval forces of the armed forces of Ukraine that Ukrainian Neptunes were used there. Because up to now, the operators of the Neptunes, and both the naval and the land-based versions, are the naval forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. And they are the ones carrying out these launches in northern Ukraine, and accordingly targeting Russian regions in particular. This damaged electro-detail plant produced goods that were used in various sectors of the Russian defense industry, aerospace, instrument engineering, and other fields. In particular, they manufactured printed circuit boards for military equipment, for aircraft, antennas for various stations, for other systems, as well as components for UAVs, including strike UAVs, which the Russians are currently using, connectors that they use on the front line. This is news #1, which is worth talking about, and such strikes are happening more and more often. And as I mentioned yesterday, well, I don't like the arguments of the skeptics who say, where are our missiles? Well, here are our missiles. Here they are, our missiles. Yes, now people are writing, of course, but where are our flamingos? Believe me, the flamingos will come too. You just can never please the skeptics. In half a year, they'll be writing, where is our nuclear weapon? How can that be? We've been fighting for 4 years and still no nuclear weapons. What I mean is, we've been fighting a full-scale war for 4 years and still don't have nuclear weapons. This is the first strike that deserves to be highlighted. Of course, yesterday we also had strikes on Feodosia. In Feodosia, a base was hit, the fuel and lubricants depot of the Russian Federation, right in the area where this fuel is concentrated. And overall, it's quite an interesting story, because the Crimean Peninsula is still being extinguished now, and Belgorod was being extinguished over the weekend. And this is a strategy of working out, of creating inconveniences for the Russians themselves, who think of themselves as so innocent and harmless, believing they can stay out of the war. But no. And it's interesting, how will you, in Belgorod region, manage to live without generators, because generators won't have fuel if Ukrainian forces continue to strike enemy targets, various objects on the territory of the Russian Federation and the occupied territories. For me, a friendly resource in particular is one called Third World War. It's a public channel. It exists, among other places, on Telegram. And on this resource, we keep track of which strikes were carried out and when throughout the week on the territory of the Russian Federation. Here you can see a schematic map of such strikes. Let me explain what this map means. This map shows that last week was one of the most remarkable and eventful in recent times in terms of strikes on Russian territory and the occupied territories. There were simultaneous strikes on the energy sector, logistics, the oil industry, and the chemical industry. All of this reduces the Russian Federation's ability to sustain its war economy. This is truly a comprehensive approach. I am convinced that this is a comprehensive strategy with significant consequences. So the intensity of last week lies in the fact that at least 19 verified strikes were carried out on various military targets. 19 strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation and the occupied territories. He reports, so to speak, literally with his mouth, when, where, and which targets were hit. On September 22nd, the Kanevskaya traction station was hit, as well as the Astrakhan gas processing plant, which processes more than 6 billion cubic meters of commercial gas annually. This happened in one day, Monday of last week. The next day is Tuesday. The Elgov electrical substation was hit, as well as the Kresnaya Yaruga electrical substation in the Belgorod region, and Valuki also in Belgorod. These are three logistical and railway facilities directly involved in supporting essentially enemy supply operations in northern Ukraine. Specifically, when we talk about Valuki, we need to keep in mind that this is the direction for supporting and potentially further supplying Russian troops towards Kupiansk, Vuzlovi, which the occupiers are striving to seize in order to restore the railway connection, which is the backbone of Russian logistics. After that, on Wednesday, September 24th, there was a record number of targets hit. This included the Frunzenska electrical substation. Next up was the massive oil refinery, which is truly one of the very largest and most significant refineries in all of Russia, specifically Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat. It processes about 6 million tons of oil per year. After that, there were the oil pumping stations Kuzmichi and Zenzivatka. Zenzivatka, by the way, was hit again. The Novorossiysk Transneft terminal complex, the liquefied gas terminal in Novorossiysk as well, the oil loading pier in Tuapse. And that was simply the maximum set of strikes, which I also talked about last Wednesday. Well, just the maximum number of targets we could possibly hit. The next day, on Thursday, the 25th of September, Eurochem, Belorekensk Mineral Fertilizers, the Shchastya gas distribution station, which supplies the Luhansk thermal power plant, as well as the Severodonetsk and Novopskov gas distribution stations, all three are located in the Luhansk region in order to reduce the occupiers' ability to exist at all on our occupied territories. The same applies to Crimea. Crimea is also awaiting this. That is, unfortunately, we will be forced to cut off the occupiers' ability to exist on our occupied territories, to do everything so that they cannot remain there. After that, the Afipsky oil refinery was hit, not for the first time. The Afipsky oil refinery processes over 6 million tons of oil per year. After that, on the 27th, on Saturday, it was the Belgorod CHP plant. On Sunday, it was the Belgorod CHP, and on Saturday, it was the Tingyvatova oil processing station, So I have listed 19 facilities that were hit last week, 19 in 7 days. In oil refining in particular, a variety of units and facilities came under attack overall. Those that provide for the powerful, let's say, processing of Russian oil at a rate of 12.25 million tons per year. That is, this is 2 oil refineries, not counting the processing at distillation stations, just 2 refineries alone, over 12 million tons per year. These are enormous volumes, simply put. These are gigantic volumes. These are massive strikes that Ukraine is delivering on the territory of the Russian Federation. And right now, at this stage of the military actions, the war is drifting in such a way that everything is being decided back there in the rear. Yes, the Russians will try to suppress us. They will try to destroy our oil refining, our gas production, and they will try to simply put out our lights, striking our thermal power plants. But we definitely will not just stand by and watch anymore. This is not 2022. We will not respond symmetrically. We will respond asymmetrically, causing pain to the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, that's little consolation. Of course, we are striking the Russians. I understand that many Ukrainians want greater satisfaction. We are striking military and critical infrastructure targets. And the Russians, for example, are striking Kherson. Yesterday, I came across some statistics that are not at all encouraging. The Russians are carrying out terrorist attacks. There's a Telegram channel called Okogora that has compiled the following statistics about Kherson. This, friends, is a heat map of various strikes using FPV drones that the Russians have used against Kherson, including against our peaceful civilian population. because after the liberation of Kherson in 2022, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, using drones, not just FPVs, at first they were dropping munitions from Mavics, and then they started using FPVs. There they organized a safari against the local population. A safari. What does this heat map show? It shows the number of strikes specifically not on military targets, not on the personnel of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. In other words, not on combatants, not on participants in hostilities at all.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And by the way, this map doesn't reflect statistics since 2022, but only for the past year. In fact, from 2024 to 2025, the total number of publicly known victims as a result of such strikes by Russian drones amounts to 2,877 people. Just imagine, almost 3,000 civilians, and among them are also included employees of the State Emergency Service, that is, rescuers, who essentially are not combatants. They are not participants in hostilities. They eliminate the consequences. They help the civilian population. But the Russians strike them as well. And in fact, medics, by the way, state emergency service workers, volunteers, and among these almost 3,000 people, 267 have been injured. And the total number of wounded is 2,242. Out of these, 2,877 and 368 civilians have been killed. This is the tactic that the damned enemy uses against the civilian population. We, and I'll repeat myself, yes, I understand that Ukrainians understandably wish death upon a large number of our enemies, including among the civilian population, but that's not what we are fighting for. For us, and this is much more of a priority than, say, shelling residential neighborhoods in Moscow or destroying their infrastructure. This is much more of a priority given that we are limited in resources. I will stand by this opinion, and not because I somehow sympathize with Russians, but because it is logical from the standpoint of allocating our resources. We cannot afford to waste them, and we need to destroy first and foremost what sustains the war machine of the Russian Federation. And at the front, we do have changes. The changes we have are localized and in favor of Russian advances. In particular, these advances have already been recorded for 10 days in a row. Essentially, the Russians are advancing in the Novopavlivka direction. For example, yesterday on September 29th, changes appeared on the deep state map in the area of Novomykolaivka and Novogrigoryivka. A day before that, if we scroll through the map, there were changes in the area of Beresov and Verbove. According to some information that was circulated, particularly in Telegram channels with confirmation of enemy losses, it is highly likely that the enemy managed to gain a foothold in Verbove, which, well, cannot be considered good news. That is the Novopavlivka direction, the junction of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Unfortunately, damn those enemies, remains the least stabilized area. So here, as I already mentioned, the enemy has been advancing at a steady pace for 10 days. On the deep state map, there are constant updates about the enemy's advances in these areas. In addition, the enemy has made advances on the map. There was visualized movement to the south of Pokrovsk. Ultimately, these are not new advances. These are the ones I talked about a week ago, about how, regarding the Dobropilya operation, we didn't exactly miss it, but rather the Russians approached right up to the very southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. Right now, these changes precisely reflect the trend, the dynamic that was mentioned earlier. In the Lyman direction, the Russians have now completely occupied the Serebryansky forestry area. Although, again, this didn't happen just yesterday, the complete occupation of these areas, well, this only means one thing, that soon there will be continued pressure and something else there in the near future. Already today, right now, the occupiers are actually present on the outskirts of Siversk, and the pressure on Lyman from both sides is also clearly going to continue and will keep being carried out. From the side of Yampol and undoubtedly, and first of all from the side of Drobyshevi and in the context of cutting off enemy logistics at these locations. Drobyshev, Novoselivka, Shandriholova. By the way, what's interesting right now in this sector where we have Novoselivka, Drobyshev, Shandriholov, and Karpivka, in this sector there are currently, and this is public information that can be found in the relevant public networks, very combat-capable units operating here. Kraken, the newly formed Drone Systems Regiment within the 3rd Army Corps, K2, and the 20th Drone Systems Regiment have also demonstrated their work here, particularly in Karpivka, including the capture of enemy soldiers in this area. So let's say the Russians don't feel completely free here. There are prospects for improvement, but it's clear that with such an expanded and entrenched enemy presence on the right bank of the Zherebets, and with the existence of such a stronghold, eliminating it will be an extremely difficult task. But now, overall, if we describe the current trend in the Lyman direction, there is a river here, a river called the Zherebets. I talked about this yesterday, showed a video of how intensively our aviation is operating in this direction. And essentially, the main task of the aviation now is to cut off any crossings, any bridges that the occupiers are building in the area under their control. And accordingly, cutting off this logistics is supposed to worsen the overall supply to this bridgehead, and in addition, pushing the enemy out of their forward positions by our advanced drone units should, within this bridgehead, create a kind of continuous kill zone for the enemy where they simply won't be able to expand any further. Therefore, there is hope, of course, for an improvement in the situation here, although it goes without saying that the enemy isn't just sitting idly by either. All of this is our soldiers' response to the scenario that the enemy has imposed here in the Lyman direction. And right now, this scenario is, well, quite complicated. Well, friends, I'll finish with a fantastically interesting video from the Pokrovsk direction, which was the highlight of yesterday. And this is what the predators of the heights, the steppe predators, the 59th Brigade of Unmanned Systems, showed in a video how they, using a $500 drone, the excellent Shrike drone, shot down a Russian helicopter. So $500 versus $20 million plus the crew members who obviously have been 200'd. Here is the objective control and the strike and destruction of this Russian helicopter, either a Mi-8 or a Mi-28 model. Most likely it was a Mi-28 because at first there were versions saying it was a Mi-8. But that's not really important. The very fact is already very good. We've started to get used to, friends seeing in the reports or in the information about downed Russian planes or helicopters, a +1, +2 appearing in the general staff summary. I'll just remind you that only last week there were similar strikes by the GUR in Crimea. 2 planes at a time, 1 helicopter at a time. Now the 59th Assault Brigade is destroying them with drones like this. This is part of the Unmanned Systems Forces. We've gotten used to seeing reports every morning about strikes on enemy oil refineries, some oil pumping stations, or any other critically important facilities for the occupiers. You get used to good things quickly, so you start craving more, you get hooked and want even more. For now, let's focus on the point where we are. Of course, the number of strikes will increase and our capabilities will grow as well, but at the same time, we shouldn't underestimate the risks posed by the enemy either. The enemy will also improve their countermeasures, and it's quite likely that the strikes against us will increase as well, because everything is basically moving step by step, keeping pace with each other. That's how things stand. As of now, I'll repeat, a lot is being decided there. Not at the front line, of course, things are being decided there too, but now the war is already starting to shift to the rear areas, and the fact that we are bringing it onto the territory of the Russian Federation is, in essence, the decisive task right now, starting from 2022, which is being carried out by Ukraine's defense forces. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves, friends. All the best, and until we meet again.